Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan has rejected Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's remarks blaming Islamabad for last year's attack in the Pulwama district of occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the BJP leadership used the attack for electoral gains. It said the Indian government blames Pakistan to cover its own failures and shortcomings. In Pakistan, security forces have killed a high-value terrorist during a raid on a militant hideout in the southwestern province of Balochistan. The military's media wing said the deceased was responsible for the killing of innocent civilians and several attacks on security forces. It said a soldier has also been wounded during the exchange of fire. In occupied Kashmir, a general strike is being observed to protest new laws that allow Indians to buy land in the region. Hurriyat leaders and other politicians have rejected the Indian attempt to change the demography of Kashmir. The occupied valley has been under a strict curfew since New Delhi revoked its autonomy in August last year. The COVID-19 infections tally in the United States has topped 9 million with more than 229,000 deaths. India has recorded 551 deaths and over 48,000 cases overnight as the country's caseload crosses 8 million. In Pakistan, 11 people have lost their lives to the virus, with the death toll exceeding 6,800. While globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.18 million lives and infected more than 45.4 million people. Legendary British actor Sir Sean Connery has passed away at the age of 90. He was best known for being the first person to play fictional spy James Bond. During his decades-long career, he bagged several awards, including an Oscar, 2 BAFTA awards and 3 Golden Globes. These were the top stories. News is coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We start from Pakistan, which has rejected Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's remarks blaming Islamabad for last year's attack in Kashmir's Pulwama district. 40 Indian soldiers were killed in the suicide attack. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the BJP leadership used the incident for electoral gains. It said India has failed to provide any credible evidence of Pakistan's alleged involvement in the incident. The Foreign Office said the Indian government blames Pakistan to cover its own failures and shortcomings. It told India to stop dragging Pakistan into its domestic politics. Now, in occupied Kashmir, a general strike is being observed to protest new laws that allow Indians to buy land in the region. The Hurriyat leaders and other politicians have rejected the Indian attempt to change the demography of Kashmir. Until last year, Indians were not allowed to buy property in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But in August 2019, India scrapped Kashmir's special status and brought in a slew of changes through new laws. The legislation that came into effect on Tuesday removed inherited protections on land and jobs for Kashmiris. The action triggered widespread anger amid a harsh curfew and communications blackout. Kashmiris expressed their resentment against the measures and termed it India's settler colonial project. Even the occupied valley's pro-India politicians say New Delhi has put Kashmir's land up for sale. The draconian laws also authorize the Indian Army to declare any area as strategic for operational and residential purposes. Now, the United States says Indian hesitation in its border standoff with China has hurt Washington's bid to contain Beijing. According to the Indian media, U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo said this during his recent visit to New Delhi. Pompeo said India's hesitation in its confrontation with China is being watched closely across the world. India's Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson has rejected the report. Pompeo recently wrapped up a five-nation tour of Asia with a call for unity to counter China's influence. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, security forces have killed a terrorist during a raid on a militant hideout in the southwestern province of Balochistan. The military's media wing said the deceased was responsible for the killing of innocent civilians and several attacks on security forces. It said a soldier has been wounded during the exchange of fire. The security forces also recovered a large cache of arms and ammunition from the hideout. Now in Afghanistan, the government says the deputy head of Taliban's military commission for the Helmand province has been killed in an airstrike. In a statement, the defense ministry said 8 Taliban fighters were also killed in the air raid in the Nawa district. It added a large number of weapons and ammunition were also destroyed. The ministry further said Afghan forces also killed 14 Taliban in the Uruzgan province. It said 9 other fighters were injured after they attacked army outposts in the Dahra Wood district of the province. Now, meanwhile, Afghan military said 2 of its soldiers were killed, while 5 injured in an explosion near their outpost in the Balkh province. The Taliban have not yet commented on the claims. Moving on, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev says Armenia must liberate Azeri territories to end the war over the NagornoKarabakh region. In a tweet, he said Azerbaijan does not want any third country's involvement in the fighting. Earlier, the two sides accused each other of targeting civilian areas just hours after a latest agreement to defuse tensions was reached in Geneva. The pact with the co-chairs of the Minsk group called require both countries to avoid targeting civilian areas, but fell short of what would have been a forced ceasefire. Now, nearly 1,100 people have been killed in the fighting that broke out on the 27th of September. The death toll from the earthquake in Turkey and Greece has risen to 27, while over 800 others are injured. A 7-magnitude quake with an epicenter in the Aegean Sea rattled the two countries, causing several buildings to collapse. The shallow tremor also triggered a mini tsunami that flooded the Turkish city of Izmir and Greek island of Samos. Ankara has reported 24 fatalities so far, while search and rescue operations are underway in at least 12 buildings. Officials say over 100 people have been rescued in the Aegean Izmir province. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the government has mobilized all the means for rescue efforts. Erdogan also thanked Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who called him to offer assistance. Athens has recorded 2 deaths on the Samos island, when some teenagers were buried under the debris of a building. The US Geology Survey says quake struck at a depth of 10 kilometers. Offering condolences, President Arif Alvi and Prime Minister Imran Khan say Pakistan stands with the Turkish nation, extending every support to Ankara. Now, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has distanced himself from the position of French President on the issue of freedom of expression.
Speaking about blasphemy in France, Trudeau said free speech doesn't guarantee needlessly hurting certain communities. Trudeau said freedom of speech is not without limits and it is necessary to act with respect for others in a civilized society. He said Canada defends freedom of expression but will not endorse shouting fire in a movie theater crowded with people. He said in a pluralist society, it is necessary to be aware of the impact of words, particularly on communities that still experience discrimination. Meanwhile, Indonesia's president said freedom of speech that insults the sacred values of religion cannot be justified. Earlier, Hezbollah's chief said France declared war on Muslims by publishing blasphemous caricatures.
Moving on, Iraq security forces have dismantled protest tents on the Baghdad's Tahrir Square and reopened Jamhuriya Bridge. Authorities closed the bridge and protesters set up tents at the onset of the anti-mass, anti-government protests a year ago. Commander of Operations Qais al-Muhammadawi said today's operation was done in coordination with peaceful protesters. He said Tahrir Square is an important economic center of the city. Traffic resumed on Jamhuriya Bridge right after the concrete walls were removed. Activists did not gather to protest the removal of the tents. Anti-government protests last year shook the country and killed more than 500 people. The United Nations says Israel's decision of making 5,000 homes in the occupied Palestinian territory is a clear violation of international law. A UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights has called for accountability as Israel records the highest rate of illegal settlements approvals. In a statement, Michael Link said the international community has to respond with more than mere criticism. He said the international community observes Israel's occupation and it sometimes objects but does not act to curtail the violations. Link added Tel Aviv has approved more than 12,000 settlements only in 2020. He said this acceleration of settlement growth worsens an already precarious human rights situation on the ground. Now, the United States and Sudan have signed an agreement to restore Sudan's sovereign immunity. Sudan's Justice Ministry said the agreement will settle down the cases against Khartoum in U.S. court. In a statement, the ministry said the cases include the bombing of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. Sudan has agreed to pay $335 million to the U.S. victims of the bombing incident. Earlier, President Donald Trump said the U.S. will remove Sudan from their list of state sponsors of terrorism. Washington listed Khartoum as a state sponsoring terrorism when Omar al-Bashir was president. Now, Sudan has also become the third Arab country to normalize ties with Israel, mediated by the United States. Moving on, Libya's Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj has withdrawn his decision to resign. Government spokesman Ghalib al-Zaklai said Sarraj will remain in office until the ongoing intra-Libyan political dialogue comes to an end. In an interview, Sarraj said he took the decision in response to repeated demands to avoid the political vacuum in Libya. Now, this comes a day after Libya's High Council of State urged Sarraj to stay until a new presidential council is selected. Earlier, the UN, Tripoli's parliament and Germany urged Sarraj to postpone resignation for Libya's higher interest. Early in September, Sarraj, who leads the Presidential Council, announced to transfer his powers to executive branch by the end of October. Moving on, Algerians are set to vote tomorrow on a new constitution. The government sees the referendum as a key part of its strategy to move beyond last year's popular unrest. Hospitalized President Abdelmadjid Tebboune has pushed the referendum to quell the mass protests that ousted his predecessor. The new constitution will limit presidents to 2 terms, giving more powers to the parliament and judiciary. It will also allow the army to intervene outside the country's borders. Despite Abdelaziz Bouteflika's ouster, the protest movement has failed to achieve its goal of an overhaul of the political system. Moving to Tanzania, where the 2 main opposition parties have demanded fresh elections as they denounce last week's presidential vote as fraudulent. In a news conference, opposition leaders called for mass protests from Monday. Incumbent President John Magufuli was declared the winner in the poll with 84% of the vote. Earlier, the US voiced serious concerns over alleged irregularities in the election. Ivory Coast is voting in tense election after an opposition boycott and clashes over President Alassane Ouattara's attempt to secure a 3rd term. At least 30 people have been killed in the pre-election violence. After a presidential nominee's death, Ouattara announced that he will be running for a 3rd time. Opposition candidates Pascal Affi N'Guessan and Henry Konan said it is illegal to run for a 3rd term and called for boycott and civil disobedience. While they did not officially withdraw their nominations, Ouattara said he can run for 3rd term under new constitution changes in 2016. In a statement, the UN called for peaceful polls and urged all political parties to refrain from violence. Now, Georgians are voting to elect 150 parliamentarians today. 30 seats will be elected via the majority system, while 120 through the proportional system. A majority of polls suggest the ruling Georgian Dream Party is leading, but it's not clear whether it will be able to get more than 40% of the votes needed to form a single-party government. Now, over 30 parties led by the opposition United National Movement have vowed not to form a coalition government with the ruling party. Georgia is plunged in considerable economic crisis as authorities predict a 4% contraction due to the pandemic. Now, legendary British actor Sir Sean Connery has passed away at the age of 90. He was best known for being the first person to play fictional spy James Bond. During his decades-long career, he bagged several awards, including an Oscar, 2 BAFTA awards and 3 Golden Globes.
Underneath the mango tree, my honey and me.
Who is that?
Rich tributes have been pouring in for the Oscar-winning actor who died in his sleep following a long illness. Sean Connery, whose film career spans 5 decades, was largely regarded as being the best actor to have played the iconic 007. The legendary actor appeared in 7 of the spy thrillers between 1962 and 1983. He wasn't just the James Bond, of course. Sean's other blockbusters include The Hunt for the Red October, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and The Rock. His Oscar came in 1988 when he was named Best Supporting Actor for his role as an Irish cop in The Untouchables. He was also knighted by the Queen at the Hollywood Palace in 2000. Fans say Sean will always be remembered as the world's greatest Scot and the definitive Bond. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the COVID-19 infections tally in the United States has topped 9 million, with more than 229,000 deaths. Globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.18 million lives and infected more than 45.4 million people. Details in this report.
It has almost been a year that the first case of COVID-19 was detected, but at no point over the year the world saw a sign of relief. The virus keeps breaking all records of devastation. As Latin America's death toll nears 400,000, most leaders in the region worry countries can soon face a battering second wave. Peru, with around 34,000 deaths, has one of the highest fatality rates per capita in the world.
The key is to avoid infection, because even if much progress has been made, a person with serious COVID has a 30% chance of dying. That's the truth. 20 to 30% if it's severe COVID that requires a ventilator. The mortality rate in intensive care is still over 40%.
The winter surge of the second wave of the coronavirus has created an operational tsunami in much of the European region. Belgium recently has been reporting twice as many daily cases as France. It also has one of Europe's highest mortality rates. Italy exceeded 30,000 daily infections for the first time, while German hospitals warn of resources shortage. In Spain, public clashed with the lockdown police to protest the curbs, as they say they are left at the mercy of the local food banks to feed their families.
De 400 al mes a 3.500 al día.
We have reached 3,500 a day, from 400 a month to 3,500 a day. That is to say, all the cases of vulnerability have been multiplied by 200. In this sense, I think there is a new concept, a new poverty. The profile is now different. These are people who are self-employed, entrepreneurs, TV presenters, circus workers, employees in entertainment industry.
Over in India, authorities recorded 551 deaths and over 48,000 cases overnight. The country's infection tally has exceeded 8.1 million, with over 121,000 deaths.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 11 COVID-19 deaths and 807 cases overnight. The Health Ministry says the country's death toll has reached 6,806. The ministry said there are over 12,000 active coronavirus cases in the country. It said out of nearly 333,000 countrywide cases, more than 314,000 have recovered so far. Meanwhile, Federal Minister for Planning Development Asad Umar has sought citizens' help for the compliance of SOPs. In a tweet, Umar urged people to take pictures wherever they see violations of rules and send them to the authorities. Now, Brazil's Vice President Hamilton Mourão says the government will buy a Chinese COVID-19 vaccine that is being tested in the country. This comes after President Jair Bolsonaro said the federal government will not buy vaccine from China's Sinovac. In an interview, Mourão said Bolsonaro's stance was without substance. He said the government has already put the resources to produce this vaccine and will not run away from that. Meanwhile, the European Union says any vaccine in the territory of the bloc will have to comply with approval procedures. At a press conference, the European Commission spokesperson Eric Mamer said all member states have signed up to this European vaccine strategy. Mamer added Brussels is not in negotiations with either Russian or Chinese companies. Earlier, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said Budapest was talking with Russia and China for shots as early as December. Now moving to Iraq, where 2 people have been killed and 51 others wounded after a gas pipeline exploded in the southern city of Samawa. 9 paramilitary fighters are among the injured. Police said firefighters have doused the fire after closing the gas line. The reason behind the fire is yet to be determined. Iraqi energy officials said the explosion did not disrupt the country's gas production and processing operations. Meanwhile, in Chile, the anti-government protesters took to the streets of the Santiago and clashed with the police. The protest came 6 days after a vote to change the country's constitution. Riot police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowd. Police say dozens of protesters were arrested. The protest began a little over a year ago to call for reforms to the pension, healthcare and education systems. Over in the United States, in a final burst of campaigning, President Donald Trump and his challenger Joe Biden have crisscrossed Midwestern states. These states may hold the keys to the White House. Details in this report.
The pre-election day voting, either by mail or in person, has skyrocketed amid the coronavirus pandemic. The U.S. Elections Project says 85 million citizens have already cast ballots in the presidential election. Campaigning in the battleground state of Wisconsin, President Donald Trump criticized polling numbers. He said the hidden Trump supporter will turn out and vote for him in greater numbers on November 3rd.
Anyway, this poll, so we're tied. Let's say we're tied. 1 up, 1 down. We're right, boom, very close. I think we're going to take it easily, actually. I think we're going to take it because we're going to have a turnout probably on Tuesday. You know, our people like to vote. They like to vote on Tuesday, not even on Sunday or Monday.
Some 100 supporters of Trump gathered in the northwestern Pennsylvania for a rally before the tally event. On the other hand, speaking to supporters in Iowa, Democrat candidate Joe Biden unleashed on Trump from his handling of coronavirus to his mental acuity.
And then, when he was told for the first time that we're like we did today, 1,000 deaths a day, remember what his comment was? He said, "It is what it is." Well, it is what it is because he is who he is. That's why it is what it is. These guys are something else, man.
Meanwhile, U.S. astronaut Kate Rubins has voted in the presidential election from space. Rubins said she felt it was her duty to vote.
Well, now a bear predicted Joe Biden's victory over Donald Trump in the U.S. elections. Beyond a brown bear in Siberian Zoo examined 2 watermelons portraying American presidential candidates. Details in this report.
Russia's animal political pundits have weighed in, choosing different candidates to win the 2020 U.S. presidential race. The forecast of Buyan, Khan and Bartik were calculated with watermelons. Buyan, the male bear, picked the watermelon with Joe Biden's image on it and eagerly sank his teeth into the fruit.
It is very simple to interpret the actions of animals. You need to carefully observe what they're trying to say. Considering that our animals were almost equally interested in both watermelons, the fight is going to be extremely difficult. The animals have made their choice. It's an approximate equality of votes.
2 other animal experts in Royal-Ruchi Zoo sided with an opposing party. Bartik, an Amur tiger, set his expectations on Trump immediately, while Khan, a Bengal tiger, played with the image of Biden before finally rolling the Trump's watermelon away.
The animals have a lot of time to think, discuss this matter, weigh and analyze. Therefore, in general, their judgments are usually very deep. During the previous Trump's election race, despite the losing position in which the American president has been, all our animals guessed it right. Of course, Trump didn't call back and didn't say thank you. We weren't very mad, but of course, he cannot count on such support from us as before.
In 2016, Oracle bear Buyan predicted Trump's victory. Buyan also predicted the outcome of World Cup games in host country Russia. Americans will be voting for president on November 3rd.
Moving on, now at least 7 people have been killed in a landslide sparked by heavy rains in El Salvador. The government says more than 30 others are missing under a deluge of mud. The mudslide hit the village of Los Angelitos after heavy rains loosened the earth on the flanks of the San Salvador volcano. Civil Protection Agency says the landslide carved a route for 4 kilometers, sweeping mud, rocks and tree trunks in its path. Interior Minister Maria Durand called the situation difficult and said around 35 people were buried in the slide. Soldiers with a sniffer dog are working alongside fire crews and civilians to try to unearth the survivors. Now, Philippines has ordered mass evacuation as the world's strongest typhoon of 2020 approaches the Luzon island. Emergency officials said Typhoon Goni is a Category 5 storm and sustained winds up to 265 kilometers per hour. The officials said Goni is expected to make landfall in the Philippines today. They said rescue equipment are positioned in key areas, but due to the pandemic, the emergency funds are extremely insufficient. Authorities said Goni will bring intense rains over the capital and 14 provinces. This will be the strongest typhoon in the Philippines since Haiyan storm that killed over 6,000 people in November 2013. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Now, China's manufacturing sector continues to recover in October. The National Bureau of Statistics said the country's Purchasing Managers Index expanded 51.4% in the current month. It said the PMI has been above 51% since July. The stat said despite external uncertainties due to the pandemic, the index continues to expand since March. The index for new export orders stayed at 51%, 0.2 percentage higher than in the previous month. Vice President of the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing says the PMI of this month shows the Chinese economy is resilient on the whole. Japan's aerospace manufacturer Mitsubishi Heavy Industries says it will freeze deployment of its space jet regional aircraft. The company says it took the decision to put the focus on renewable energy and other businesses in a bid to bolster profits. In a statement, Mitsubishi said they will make improvements and assess possible programs restart. It said the decision will allow the company to halve jobs in its commercial aviation business, helping it save $1.15 billion. The company said it will cut 2,000 jobs at overseas units and reassign 3,000 people internally to cut costs. Long delayed, the Mitsubishi SpaceJet has missed 6 delivery deadlines since 2013. In the English Premier League, Manchester City beat Sheffield United by 1-0 at the Bramall Lane. Kyle Walker marked his 100th Premier League appearance for City with a goal against his former club. Pep Guardiola's side dominated the first half but could not manage a single goal. But the home side came back strong in the second half and did not allow many chances for the City. The result has put City into the top half of the table with 11 points, while Sheffield remains winless and in the relegation zone with just a solitary point. And now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.